Promo Insiders, the ASI Media podcast that covers the issues that matter most to the promotional products industry. I'm C.J. Mittica, and today we're discussing the latest findings from ASI research on how the promo industry is being impacted by tariffs. Senior Executive Director of Research, Nate Kucsma, and Executive Editor, Chris Ruvo, will go over the data from Q1 and April, the stats that caught their eye, the current tariff and import situation, and what the forecast is for Q2 and beyond. But first, a word from our sponsor.
SNS Activewear and Alpha Broder are integrating to become the premier partner for the apparel industry. With one website, one purchase order, over 100 beloved brands, and 14 distribution centers, you can streamline your ordering and operations while being able to hit free freight faster than ever. Benefit from 1 to 2 day shipping with the lowest error rate in the industry, and leverage combined net term limits to benefit your business like never before. Starting May 30th, the Alpha Broder website will be retired. However, customers will now have one login, one experience, and everything they need all at ssactivewear.com.
Welcome back. So if it seems like 2025 is the year where nothing is going according to plan, that's definitely true, and especially true for us here at Promo Insiders, considering that we already tried to record this podcast once today, and we got 10 great minutes. We got 10 minutes in, and they were 10 of the most brilliant and scintillating podcast audio ever recorded. And in fact, I think we solved the trade war.
You have to
right?
Take our word for it.
Yeah, we solved the trade war. We came up with a solution that makes everybody happy, and I think we even mapped out a plan for distributors to have their best sales year ever. But it's been a few hours, and so I don't even remember what we said. Nate, do you remember?
No, I was talking to Chris about this, and I said the joy about this is that the way that Chris and I do our podcast is we talk very much from our gut and what's top of mind. So while we will repeat some of the same things, I guarantee you they will not be all the same, and they will be very, very natural because it'll be sometimes new to us what we say.
Yeah, so in short, we're not going to recreate the magic. We're just going to have to make new magic. So you all will get a front row seat to that. So yes, we are talking about tariffs. And so what we're going to talk about specifically is, well, it's going to be based on the research that Nate in ASI Research is doing regarding Q1 and April sales data and other metrics that they surveyed about. But we're not going to do a super hardcore deep dive into the numbers. We're going to use it more just sort of as a baseline, just to inform our discussion about what's going on right now in the industry and in the economy and the country as a whole, especially as it relates to tariffs. Be sure, though, to check out our reports online. Chris did a great Q1 recap that's full of charts and numbers, and we will have a forthcoming April report as well that will include some new numbers too. So we'll include that in the show notes so that you can check it out. But just to start with, Nate, so you do a quarterly sales survey every quarter, but you're doing something that's a little bit different now and a little bit stepped up from what we normally do. So what exactly is going on with ASI Research and sort of these extra efforts?
It's like COVID all over again, CJ, except, I mean, it's not COVID all over again, right? But the last time we did monthly efforts where we actually looked at what was happening to the industry, both from a distributor point of view and a supplier point of view, was during COVID. Normally doing it quarterly is plenty. Quarterly is when companies take a look at their financials. It's, what Chris said earlier today when we were talking about it, it's when public companies report. They report quarterly. We don't, so that's normally what we ask to do. But we also know that with the rapidly changing trade situation worldwide, actually, right? But also that is really affecting our industry. We felt it was important to do, more or less, I guess what you could say, almost like temperature checks with our industry so that we could find out what was going on, what were people saying, what were their expectations, and then report that out to ASI members, because a lot of our members are, let's be clear, they're solopreneurs, right? They're very small companies. They talk to who they talk to. We have the opportunity to provide almost like an umbrella look at the industry as a whole so people can understand what's happening. And with my numbers and with the reporting that everybody at editorial does, but also especially Chris, we can provide that that overall look at the industry, so people know that they're not existing purely and doing business in a vacuum.
And so normally, again, we just survey our members quarterly, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Nate, but like the reason we don't do it more often is that there's not a need to. The economic situation, the marketplace situation isn't changing at such a volatile rate that we need to
correct.
Yes,
usually
correct. Yeah, during normal times. So there's a reason why. So like we haven't done this since COVID, because things have stabilized and there was a sense of normalcy. But right now, because there's been so many changes, so much back and forth with tariffs, and every day, every day there seemingly was a new announcement. That's why we're doing it at this quicker rate. And I guess speaking about those announcements. So Chris, I want to bring you in here, since you've been reporting on the tariff situation for the industry. February, March, and April, there was a ton of announcements, a lot of back and forth. The tariffs are on, the tariffs are off, and in our industry and the country as a whole had whiplash. But at least recently, what's going on with tariffs? Not the full breakdown of which tariffs are in effect, but what's coming out of the administration, and what's been the pace of the tariff related news, at least in the past couple weeks?
Yeah, it's I guess what you're driving, it has been a little slower in terms of like new announcements or major mega announcements or implementations and rescissions and all that kind of stuff. But as we sit here today, there was very notable news. We're sitting here May 7th. Top U.S. trade officials, the U.S. Treasury Secretary and U.S. Trade Representative are supposed to meet with their counterparts from China and Switzerland this weekend. It's unlikely that they're going to forge a new massive trade deal between the two nations, but the intention of the talks, although I guess you can never rule it out with how things are being going nowadays.
Right.
But the intention of the talks, I think, as has been stated, is to kind of de-escalate things a bit, to set the groundwork for future talks for a larger trade deal. Now, does that mean that they can come out of the meetings and President Trump might say, hey, I'm happy with things preliminarily, and let's lower the rate from 145 to 75 or something like that? 145 being the tariff rate, 145% tariff rate that was implemented so far in 2025 on China-made imports by the president's administration so far. That's what I'm referring to. Could he potentially lower that? Oh, sure, but no one really knows what's going to happen there, and it's tough to kind of gauge. But that's been the most notable development, I would say, for our industry of late, is that there's actually movement now towards some kind of trade talks with China, the nation from which North American promo sources the most.
And not a moment too early, honestly. Like, we're being honest here. Like when we look at the overall industry, like coming out of 2024, the industry was doing okay, right? It wasn't great, but it was doing better, and then everything kind of got turned on its head a little bit in late Q1.
So
yeah, I think that.
Go ahead,
sorry, go ahead. See,
no,
I was just I think that's a fair characterization from Nate. I think a lot of us, including myself, were expecting a stronger Q4 to the end of 2024 than we got, and then there was a sense like, okay, when the new administration comes in, this is not me speaking, this is the perception that I had from industry executives, is that we are going to have a pro-business administration, and that's going to really free up spend, and there's going to be a lot of momentum in the economy. But with the tariff announcements early in the year, everything from a 10% baseline tariff on all imports to the 145% rate on China to 25% tariff rates on imports from Canada and Mexico not covered by United States Mexico-Canada agreement, that's the actual tariffs themselves, and then just the uncertainty over where things are going has dampened that obviously significantly.
So since we're talking about it, let's bring it up. In the Q1 sales survey that you put out, Nate, we reported that the promo industry in distributor sales is down 3.6%. So
Yeah.
Can you put that number into context? And is that just simply based just on the impact of tariffs?
Oh, I mean, maybe, right? Unfortunately, like, there's so many different things that are variables here. What does 3.5% mean? Well, let's assume there's $5 billion in sales, right? You're looking at a couple hundred. million taken out of the industry in Q1. That's really what it comes down to. Now, does that mean it's gone? Does that mean that money's never coming into the industry? No, not necessarily. It may have been postponed. It may be people just holding all purchases until Q2 or Q3 even, right? So there is that possibility. But it's significant in that it's a fairly large decline. Our industry, I don't want to say can grow like clockwork, because God knows for the last 5 years that has not been the case, right? But from the years before the pandemic, from 2014 when I first joined ASI all the way through 2020, the industry was growing at between like 2% to 6% every quarter, year over year, right? So it was a steady growth rate. The industry was going up $1 billion each year. It was growing at a fairly level rate. Then COVID hit and everything got just put into a washing machine. But it was still relatively strong coming out for the last few years. There were a couple of drops here or there as the economy and the promo industry went through the growing pains of coming back from COVID and having to achieve another, overcome that $5 to $6 billion that had been lost, right? But we did. But Q1 this year, I think coming out of 2024 I think we were all expecting it to be fairly strong. And I think it started off fairly strong as well in January and February, but similar to what does tend to happen, it has happened in the last, a few times in the last couple of years. 1 month can really hurt the quarter, and I think that's what happened here, especially in March, where all of a sudden it was like a shock to the system and people pulled back spending. Tariffs, one thing, CJ, but also I think there's just a general economic slowdown, and even if it's not disastrous yet, right? There's warning signs. There's a perception out there. There's a mindset that a recession could be on the way, and we're 1 quarter into it, according to the federal government, which is, I think, very significant.
Yeah, GDP did retreat in Q1. I think it was down. The stated number was 0.3%. So what happens, unfortunately, is that if companies are already experiencing some kind of downturn or even worried about it, what they're going to do a lot of times is immediately pull in what they view as discretionary spending. And sadly, our industry sometimes can get classified in that. So I think you saw spending pull back that was more severe in promo than it was in the larger economy, even because of not even quote tariffs, but just perception issues around the economy and worry about where things were going. I will say though, and one thing that I did find encouraging, at least in some of the Q1 data, and I think we'll discuss this more when we get into April specific findings, is that 40% of distributors still did drive a sales increase in the first quarter. So that means first quarter 2025 relative to first quarter of 2024, yep, their sales were better, and that was for all distributors. And then the revenue class of distributors that make between $1 million and $5 million a year, they actually were taken as a group experienced a year-over-year increase of 2%. So it wasn't that business. We don't want to paint too negative a picture that business wasn't happening. That's certainly not the case. But it did retreat from where it was the year before on the whole.
Yeah. Go ahead, Nate.
Go ahead, CJ.
I was going to say that's a fair point, Chris, and like it feels like we lived 1,000 lifetimes with this tariff news cycle. But I think we have to remember, if we're talking about Q1 at least, the biggest announcement, at least the announcement that said the most major shockwaves, was the announcement of the reciprocal tariffs, which happened on April 2nd, right? Which is technically
second quarter.
Correct, and we will dive into that. But it's so hard to remember that now because we've been living in this sort of endless news cycle of the tariff announcements. But really, Q1 was kind of isolated from at least the worst of the hue and cry regarding tariffs. And I think that you see that play out in the data, which was it certainly wasn't great, and a decrease isn't great, but it might have been worse depending on when Trump made his announcement.
And to the point also with what we were talking about as it related to overall business, right? We're not going to come out with a prediction that April sales were up or down by this percent, right? But we did ask distributors out there whether or not their sales, how did their April 2025 sales compare to their 2024 sales? And it was right down the middle. it's basically, I think it was 37% of distributor sales increased, 37% decreased, and the rest were flat year over year. So like, again, to put it in perspective, during COVID, we had 90% of distributors reporting a year over year decrease, right? That's not where we're at now. So you're right, CJ. I think it's right to sort of mitigate what we're saying here by saying there is business out there, right? It is not grounded. It's just in pockets, and it's just more cautious right now than I think we would have otherwise been.
I think too, I think some distributors are following a strategy that we have advocated, and certainly people who know more than us have advocated, which is if you're being proactive with your clients and saying, hey, things might increase, prices may increase later this year, you might want to get some orders in now. I think we might have some front loading of business, which may help Q2. I actually was initially very worried for how Q2 is going to go, and I'm not going to make a prediction because I typically will get them wrong. So like, but like I was worried about Q2 in the wake of those April 2nd Liberation Day tariff announcements. But at least for as far as the first month has gone, even if it was front loading orders for later in the year, it didn't seem dire based on some of Nate's findings, and Nate, I think it was actually closer to just about 40%. It was 39%.
Yeah, okay, 39, not 37. Yeah. And yeah. I think that's why we wanted to do this, because like it's easy to get wrapped up in the news cycle. It's easy to get wrapped up from what you think is happening. But when you actually reach out to our members, and we have an opportunity, and I really appreciate our members who answer these surveys. They're not because they're giving us an outsider viewpoint. It's, when you work in the halls of ASI, and you're dealing with this on a day-to-day basis, and it's one thing, but when you actually go to the people who are in the field and see what they're experiencing, it gives us it gives me at least a bit of perspective.
One thing I'd add to that, not to doomsay on that positivity, and this is not just promo. This is across many industries, retail. When given the 145% tariff rate, which is in addition to, by the way, to tariffs that were already in place on China, there's been a widespread pause in importing, and that may not sound like a super sexy topic, but like it's not necessarily showing up yet. But if that pause becomes more extended, it could lead to inventory shortages, not just in our industry, but elsewhere, which spikes things like inflation. And we're a product-based industry, so if you don't have products to sell, that's obviously an issue. So it's a bit of a timing game here, where if we see some deceleration or de-escalation, as top trade officials put it, and that leads to a tariff reduction, we might see a surge in importing, as well, which carries some of its own issues too, because if everybody in promo and beyond is trying to get their products landed in the United States, could send shipping costs up, it could create delays. Sure. So there's a whole bunch of knock-on effects that come into play with this.
Yeah.
So Chris, I was going to ask about this later, but since you brought up the topic, I just want to hear more from you now. So the importing situation. So what have you been hearing from suppliers? How are they approaching the situation, and what should distributors and I guess end buyers come to expect in the next 1, 2, 3, 6 months on looking ahead?
Going that many months out, giving everything that's happened is a little tough, and I hate to give you a politician's answer on that. What I would say is there is most certainly not everyone. I don't want to paint an inaccurate. It's not everyone, but there are a number, let's say, of suppliers who have just stopped importing from China for the time being, because they would literally, like, the import would cost so much more than what the product would even be worth. They're not going to make money on it. Do you know what I'm saying? They have to sell it at such an incredibly inflated rate that the market wouldn't bear it. Again, that's not everybody, but that's some. And without naming names, it's definitely some larger suppliers, let's put it that way, that have taken that tack. Again, not everybody. There's others who say that, hey, they have orders that they need to serve, and that they operate on a more of like a real time inventory model. No, and so they have to bring stuff in, and they're bringing it at that rate, and I think they're eating it to the extent that they can, and then they're hoping that that their rates are going to come down and make it up on the back end, like spreading out costs over years, even to bring to kind of make a healthier bottom line. So that's kind of the situation that we're in now. Of course, what everybody's been, not everybody, but a lot have been doing too, is geographic sourcing diversification. That doesn't happen overnight, of course. Like, you can't go from making 100% of your products in China to only making 10% there and spreading it around to different countries around the globe. But there's been a movement in our industry for years. It started before COVID, accelerated during COVID, kind of decelerated a little bit in the post-COVID era, but now is coming back again, where companies are saying, "Hey, I can't be so reliant on China. I need to produce in other nations that have a lower tariff burden." So, for instance, if you're in a nation to which that's only subject to the baseline tariff import of 10%, your tariff cost to bring those products from that nation into the United States is a lot less than if you're importing from China and you're having to deal with an 145% rate. So it's basic math. So that's prompting sourcing diversification among suppliers as well. But again, keep in mind, it just doesn't happen overnight, and not just our industry, but other industries are looking to do it as well. And there's certain products that you simply can only make in China. That's what suppliers tell us. There's certain types of products, certain types of hard goods, drinkware, electronics that other countries don't have the infrastructure to support. And
Chris, you said this already, but I think I want you just to sort of put a pin in it now. If there's not inventories coming in, and at some later point, depending on what happens with the tariffs, companies either decide to not bring in as much inventory because the tariffs remain high and onerous, right? Or the tariffs get dropped, and then there's this rush to ship these things over because right, those barriers have been removed. How's that going to impact the promo industry?
Yeah, and again, so much is in play, but it could be similar to what we saw in COVID. If everybody remembers, in COVID, the world shut down, everybody stopped importing, nobody was buying anything, and then it was like somebody threw lights on in the factory and everything kind of came back to life. And what in essence that resulted in was much higher shipping costs for our industry. Shipping costs directly impact product price. Okay, now, if the tariffs, though, are brought down drastically from what they were, and that's prompting this shipping surge, does that offset with the shipping price cost? I don't know. There's complicated math there. The bottom line is, though, in a most immediate practical sense, it could make it longer to get stuff landed. So let's say you've not imported for 2 or 3 months or whatever the heck it might be, because you were worried about because you couldn't shoulder the tariff. That's the word I'm looking for. But now you're like, okay, oh my gosh, all right, tariffs are down, and I can afford this again, and I want to get stuff in right away. Well, so is everybody else trying to do the same thing. So you may have a much longer time to get product from your overseas partner to you here. If that is the case, well, what does it lead to? Stock gaps. That's exactly what happened in COVID. There was the shutdown, and then the surge in demand made it longer to get products landed.
And we're talking about suppliers now, and that leads into what you're doing, Nate, with these quarterly, now monthly sales surveys, where we typically talk with just distributors in terms of their revenue, but now I know that you're surveying suppliers as well to find out how they're doing, and the numbers are not great compared to distributors. Just as an example, in Q1, so 42% of distributors had a revenue decrease. It was 58% of suppliers. And that's just one example. I think there's other examples that show that suppliers are feeling this first and feeling it the most. So why is that the case, Nate?
No, I mean, that's absolutely true, right? I mean, 100%. And the reason is because suppliers are locked in many cases to their supply chains. Like what Chris is saying was, suppliers are even if they have a diversified base from which they're able to import their products, the vast majority of them are still getting products from China. And even if they're not, they're still impacted by they were still impacted by some level of tariffs, right? So distributors have the opportunity to choose who they're going to use. Maybe they can use a company they haven't used before. Maybe they can transition their customers to slightly different options or lower cost options or what have you. They can move their business around a lot easier than can suppliers. And I think that that's really what is bearing out. And even if you start looking into the remainder for 2025, when we ask people what their projections are, by and large, distributors are going to be more optimistic than suppliers are for their sales for the remainder of the year. And a matter of fact, more than half of distributors are expecting their sales in 2025 to increase over 2024. With again,
that's the April data. That's the most recent.
Right, that's the most recent data. And the reason for that is I think that there is, and by the way, even suppliers are somewhat more optimistic that they expect their sales to increase in 25. But all of that is predicated on the fact that people believe that tariffs are either going to go away or be severely cut compared to where they are now. Because we also ask a question as part of this survey that says, if the tariff situation were to remain identical to where it is now, what do you expect? And those numbers get vastly more negative for everybody involved.
I think too, in one of your findings, and you correct me because I don't have it in front of me, but for the April Counselor Confidence Index, like which measures business health, financial optimism, outlook, etc. The distributor outlook actually ticked up a bit from what it was in
it was Q1. It was very close. Like they were all like it. It fell. This Counselor Confidence Index, which is modeled after another, business confidence index that's been around for decades now. This started back in 2000, so we benchmark everything to like a level of 100. It fell precipitously in Q1. Sharply. Like not COVID sharply, but it felt the sharpest we've ever seen, other than that one instance. It didn't continue that drop in April. As a matter of fact, it kind of leveled off a lot. And expectations for the remainder of the year also improved from where they were at the end of Q1. So again, I think that I don't know if optimism is the word, but people are sort of holding off a little bit before on the doom and gloom speak and on what they're feeling. But again, I think that's because, and it's being predicated on the fact that tariffs will not be here for the entire year. But if they're here through Q2 and Q3, I think then everything shifts dramatically.
Yeah, I agree, and not to belabor the point, but it seems like everybody I talk to, they feel like there's no way that this is sustainable, and that it can't last, and because of that, like they're not sticking a fork in the year. It's not like with like a COVID situation where it was like, well, what do you do? It's a pandemic. It's like, hey, this is a correctable thing. Like if the president were to come out tomorrow and say, I'm going to take a much softer approach on tariffs, I don't want to say it'd probably be hyperbole to say it would ignite economic activity overnight, but it would certainly help. It would certainly send stocks up quite dramatically, and I think it would alleviate trade a lot of uncertainty, at least in the marketplace.
And Chris, to your point earlier, where you mentioned if this is shut down or if business slows down for too long, the impacts on the supply chain, it is pretty vital given the lead time that a lot of our products may require to come over from overseas, that for the industry, if this is rectified soon, like if this is rectified in September or October this year, that doesn't help 2024 in the least.
Like I think and hey, I'm not the supply chain expert on every industry for sure, but from what I was reading, and what the experts are saying, like June is a very extremely like critical cutoff point, like as far as like, especially for like retailers and getting stuff in for the holiday season. Like, yes, that's where you're thinking, about already.
Sure.
If you're importing, you're that many months ahead. So that seems to be some kind of demarcation line, like that's very significant, that if things are still in place, like the economic repercussions can be much more severe if we're still at the same tariff level.
I just peeked at the data on our computers. I'm like, yeah, that's close, Chris.
It's about 6 weeks. Yeah.
So there's one more data point from our research that I want to touch upon, and it's in regards to suppliers raising prices, because caught up in all this in the tariffs and sort of their cascading effects, right, on the economy, on buyer actions and all that. There's really the fact and the direct impact, which is that when you have tariffs, it costs more for importers to bring those products into the country, and those costs are then either the supplier, right, in our industry either absorbs those costs, or they have to pass it along to the distributor, and the distributor makes the same decision. Do we absorb those costs, and do we pass it along to our customer? And the idea was that these tariff levels are so high and so onerous that suppliers are going to have no choice but to raise prices. And Nate, this is something that you surveyed suppliers about, and you asked them, have you raised your prices yet? And if so, by how much? So what did you find when you asked that question?
So yeah, it's interesting, right? We asked that in March, about what they had done after Q1 closed, and then we asked this again just in the beginning of May here, and it has changed, right? So it's gone from from like 45% or 40% of suppliers who had raised their prices back at the end of March, early April, to now 55 and 60% that are raising it, and that's going to continue to go up. So CJ, I guess to your point though, nobody can be expected to. You can expect suppliers and distributors and such to maybe not pass along everything in times of normal economic situations here. If some prices went up 1%, 2%, these prices are doubling in some cases, depending on the products. So yeah, or more, right? So they're not going to just, they can't eat these. They would go out of business. And that's definitely not good for anybody. So no, I think that they're going to be passed on. And I was watching an interview, I think it was with auto executive, and he said, listen, no matter who you are, if U.S. automakers are going to be impacted by tariffs less than will other companies, but they're still going to be impacted very significantly because of the cost of goods that go into their products. And I think that's the case for here. So no matter who you are, even if you're dealing with products that are assembled in the USA or what have you, your prices are still going to go up. So I wouldn't be surprised if this number, when we conduct this research again at the beginning of June, is significantly higher, because then all of a sudden some companies would have already burnt through some of the inventory they had, especially on some of the more in-demand products. So no, I think that number is going to continue to go up.
Yeah, we'd been reporting just based on what people were telling us, that the price increases are really going to start to hit in a more widespread, significant way in Q2, and we're certainly seeing that. I forget, Nate, and Nate, maybe you remember. I want to say the sweet spot. That's probably a terrible term, but was 6 to 10%. For what a plurality of suppliers were increasing. I want to say that. So before, when I said prices more than double, I meant the importing costs are more than double. Not
for sure, yeah.
Not necessarily doubling price, like a $10 mug's now 20. I don't want to give that impression, but that 6 to 10% increase it's significant, especially as you start to get in on some higher end items.
And Chris, I will say this. I also think that if that, when you look at those numbers here, those numbers are being understated. And what I mean by that is, you might have some companies out there that are taking a very, very short-term hit so that they don't have to raise their prices more to actually account for, and they're willing to do that for their clients. Eventually, that's going to end.
Right, and not to go too far down the rabbit hole, you mentioned inventory before. There are still suppliers who are selling inventory that they brought to the United States under previous tariff rates or no, depending on where they were getting it from. So they can still sell through that inventory at a lower rate. Now, what many are doing, or not many, I should say, what I'm aware some are doing, is even though that inventory was brought in at a lower rate, they still increase pricing on it because they need they need cash flow necessary to anticipate what they're going to have to pay for future importing costs and
the replacement costs.
Yeah. But if but if they once they start to really feel, if it comes to that, the full brunt of those new tariffs, costs may have to accelerate even more or excuse me, prices may have to accelerate even more to your point. Yep.
So just to wrap up, I'm not going to put either of you on the spot and ask you to make a prediction in terms of like what Q2 sales are going to look like or anything like that. But Nate, I'll start with you. Just what are the factors that are going to determine how distributors and suppliers are going to fare in Q2 and beyond?
Yeah, so it's going to be, I mean, it's one, is this tariff situation resolved in the month of May? And when I say resolved, I get it's probably not going to go away, right? But is there some direction where things are locked in for 6 months or a year or what have you? Is there a reduction in terms of the tariffs on China specifically that can be overcome? My gut tells me that it's not going to. I mean, listen, the quarter's already. By the time we're talking here now, almost half over. Right? We're talking like early to mid May here. It's like I feel like once it happens, I don't think that building on something that Chris said before, I don't think it's going to be like, okay, everything's done, the tariffs are resolved, the situation, everybody is going to start spending again. I don't feel that personally. I think it's going to be things have a tendency to fall very quickly, like consumer confidence, like the stock market, and they take a lot longer to build up. I think it's going to be, if this stuff is resolved in June, let's say, and that's sort of what the demarcation line is that Chris mentioned earlier, then you're looking at hopefully a stronger end to Q3 into a strong Q4 because there will be pent up spending. But it's the rubber band doesn't snap as quickly back as when as you'd like it to be. So Q2 is not shaping up to be it's not shaping up to be great, and that's not based on what the industry is doing. It's just based on what the economy and the overall economic policy in the U.S. is doing.
Yeah, I'll maybe pick up a little bit of a similar thread. I do think for what it's worth, I don't. There's no way that 145% tariff rate on China is going to stay, but we are going to have as long as this administration is in charge, I think it's a much more significant tariff rate on China than we've seen in the past. What exactly that might look like, I've seen numbers thrown around. People, if they've listened this far along, probably have seen the same, 50 to 60%, maybe things like that. So I don't think those tariffs are entirely going away. So that is going to be a thing. What you may see though is for some of those reciprocal tariffs as quote deals are negotiated. They might come back to a baseline or that baseline 10%, which I think isn't great, but is manageable and will not be the inflationary inducer that that the specter of the reciprocal tariffs could cause. The one other thing, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it, is there's been huge demand, perhaps not surprisingly, for made in the USA products, and I see that demand actually continuing even regardless of what happens with tariffs, at least for some odd more months, because people will feel that there's a bit more stability with that. To be clear, I don't think made in the USA is going to instantly be cheaper than imported products or anything like that, or that made in USA products themselves might not increase. They might some for various reasons, but I do think that demand there will be strong. So that's an interesting thing to look at as this all plays out. So I think if you're specialized in made in the USA products, 2025 actually might be a great year for you. So that's a positive note for that portion of our industry. Broadly though, I kind of am with Nate. I think it's once things, even if there's a sense that trade deals have been inked and that things are moving in the right direction with China, that's a lot of ifs, right? That the way that this administration has shown a willingness to move quickly to enact an agenda that it feels is in the best interest long term of the nation, but maybe in the short term causes upheaval. That there will still be a sense of having been stung by that, and it could inhibit corporate spending through the remainder of the year. Well,
that's a great optimistic note that we can end on.
I hope I'm wrong. I really do, and it might not be the case. People might get, hey, it's over. It's inked. The economy's cranking. Let's go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I think just to wrap up, I think there's a couple takeaways here that it's not like all bad, right? There are companies that are finding success, right?
Absolutely.
We talk with distributors, Chris, and I know you have, I have, that are doing great. They're even having record years. So there is business out there, and it will take companies that are nimble, adaptable, and creative to find those opportunities. But I think what we've also know, and I think we learned this from COVID, and the same thing now is when you introduce disruption into the marketplace, and then you take that disruption away, at least the pressure point. It could be COVID, it could be the tariffs. Everything doesn't just snap back like Nate said, like that rubber band, right? There are sort of ramifications that will continue as a result of that disruption, and those are things that companies in our industry are going to have to navigate around, and we'll see what those are. So definitely continue, obviously, consuming our coverage. I neglected at the beginning to mention our tariff hub. So that's asicentral.com/tariffs. You can find all of our tariff reporting. Chris is a major component of that, so you can certainly get all the good information there. We're doing webinars here at ASI. Nate's research is widely available. You can go to asicentral.com/research to see Nate's latest research. And as we said, Nate, right, every month, right, we're going to be putting out new reports, correct?
Every month until we don't have to, and yes. God knows I don't know when that will be.
Yeah, it'll be a good day when we don't have to. All right, well, Nate, Chris, thank you very much for your time today. Thank you, everybody, for listening and watching. Have a great rest of your week.